Even after the developer's best efforts, Fire Emblem games usually aren't balanced very well. Sure, you could spend all your time and limited experience trying to raise Mozu, a trainee that starts unable to deal damage to the enemies in her first map, or you could raise Hinoka, who flies, joins at the same point in the game, takes way less effort and resources to raise, and will usually be just flat out better than Mozu in every relevant way until Mozu barely gets a tiny edge in the game's last few chapters. Sure, you could raise Tsubaki, the first male Pegasus rider in series history, or you could raise Hinoka, who joins in the very next chapter and matches or beats him in every single stat while holding a way better weapon that he can't even use yet. You can probably see why Hinoka is pretty good, but believe it or not, she's still a step down from this game's really amazing units. In fact, even though she's probably good enough to do anything you'd want her to do, she might not even be in the top third of this game's first generation. Joining me today to talk about Hinoka is Bloog, an extremely experienced player with a YouTube channel full of challenge runs. So let's go over everything you need to know if you want to use Hinoka. After you hit subscribe, of course. Let's get started. Hinoka is recruited in Chapter 8 along with Azama and Setsuna, making her one of the early recruits you get in Birthright. She starts as a level 8 Sky Knight with C rank lances, which is higher than the weapon rank of everyone else you recruit up to this point.
Yeah, Hinoka is immediately most comparable to Tsubaki, who you get in the previous chapter here. And she is effectively just him, but better. In fact, if you look at their base stats, Hinoka either beats or ties Tsubaki in every single stat at base.
Yeah.
And even with Tsubaki having like the better like defense growth, you know, Hinoka comes with a guard Naginata.
Yep.
So it's a little funny.
+5 defense and resistance makes her extremely difficult to kill. And even archers will struggle to kill her with the guard Naginata equipped. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. I believe she just straight up like lives pretty comfortably like at least one hit from an archer.
Wow.
In her join map.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that. It's been a while since I've let her get shot by an archer.
So being a flyer in Birthright in early game is actually pretty good. Hinoka joins in the desert map, meaning that she is one of the units that you have that can move unassisted throughout the entire map without the need of Dragon Veins, so she can be a key part in letting your units push ahead in similar maps. Once you get later into the game, flight matters a lot less, but Hinoka has many options to get out of the flyer classes.
Yeah, a lot of such options. The fastest one is, of course, Archer from Setsuna, which also isn't too great, but you know, she also does have a lot of better support options, especially from the men of the game.
Yeah.
Looking at Shiso and Kaze.
And with her flight, she is also one of the best users of her personal skill, which is Rallying Cry. Allies within 2 spaces deal +2 damage, so she basically acts as a strength and magic tonic to everyone that is within 2 spaces of her, which can be extremely impactful because some 1-round thresholds are pretty difficult to reach with some of the units that you want to be training up from low levels. So having an extra +2 damage on top of a tonic or a forge can be very impactful in letting your weaker units do things they really shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, and applying your personal skill is actually even easier than it is for a lot of other like aura skills to be applied because of how high her bulk is, especially with like guard Naginata. So it's likely that, you know, aside from like archers as a flyer, she will probably get ignored if she goes into enemy range with other units, especially when you take into consideration the bulk of most Birthright units being relatively low, especially compared to Hinoka's.
Yeah. With the guard Naginata equipped, she will probably have quite a bit more defense than Oni Savage Hayato, for instance, who does have quite a bit of defense, but it does not compare to 9+5 at base. It's kind of crazy. And yeah, her support role isn't just limited to her personal skill, because if you use her as a pair-up, she does provide the +3 speed that all Sky Knights do. which can be very impactful in letting some of the slower units start to double. In addition to providing a speed pair up, she can fly far ahead of your other units and then switch to her pair up partner and have them see combat with her speed pair up intact.
Yeah, and not to mention that, you know, everything we talked about in our Tsubaki episode where, you know, like Falcon Knight being just a pretty good support class in general, Hinoka can also just do all that too. You know, like, pure support role isn't Hinoka's best role, but, you know, if you have access to the classes that allow you to do it, then, you know, you can still do it if you really want to.
And her being at a higher base level in Tsubaki also gives her a lot easier of a time getting to things like rally speed. So instead of waiting until like deploying Tsubaki for many maps and slowly grinding his experience to get to that point, Hinoka can just be benched and then deployed where she's useful and level up there and get rally speed in the process if she promotes earlier.
And also the fact that she's a royal, she gets a lot of fast supports too. So she gets fast supports with her 2 retainers and Korin and one of her siblings. She is an outlier with the fast supports where she doesn't fast support Takumi and Sakura.
Yeah.
But despite that, she still does get very fast access to a lot of classes that she may want. She can't A+ Ryoma, but she can really easily get Archer and, more importantly, Shrine Maiden to help her support role, or even just like, you know, go into the class with like the better bases, being Priestess, if she so pleases.
And when she's supporting a unit in her pair up, she will also be providing, at higher support ranks, +1 res at C, +1 strength at A, +1 speed at S, along with an extra +1 res. Really not the best pair of bonuses, but 1 strength and 1 speed is definitely not something you will complain about for most units.
Yeah, and even that +1 luck is like sometimes pretty useful, and even like the res, since there's a lot of like clumps of like mixed attackers in Birthright, the res can be useful too, especially if you're using Hinoka as like the main lead of a combat unit too, because her res and like combined with her like alright defense is pretty good for actually allowing her to survive big groups of enemies, so long as they don't have like too much effective weaponry on her.
And that's not even mentioning her growths, which are pretty incredible across the board. Like 55 strength in Sky Knight is kinda crazy, and her speed is generally pretty good. While it is supplemented quite a bit by Sky Knight's growths, her personal speed growth is also very good. She will probably be one of your faster units if you continue to raise her.
Yeah, if you put Hinoka into a class with like a stronger like strength growth, then you just make Hinoka pretty much unstoppable. She'll be super strong, super fast, pretty decently bulky, and you know, she even has like really good hit rates to boot. Like, she is just I like personally comparing her to my Silas's. They aren't like too comparable with like how their like actual growth rates are, but given their join times and everything and what classes they're in, I like to see like, okay, what are my Silas's raw stats? What are my Hinoka's raw stats? Is Hinoka close enough to Silas? If the answer is yes, then my Hinoka is very good.
Hinoka's growths are just impressive across the board. The one place where she does struggle is her defense stats, being 35 in Sky Knights, but a fair amount of that is just being held back by Sky Knight growths rather than her personal growth.
Pretty much as soon as you get her into a class that plays into really any one of the stats, her growth in that stat will be pretty incredible. Even her magic isn't like the worst. It's not good by any means, but it's still like passable, and it's better than a decent amount of other Birthright units who just have 0% growth in magic. I think her personal is 5%.
Oh,
which is a chance at least.
So yeah, once she gets out of Sky Knights and gets into a class with an actual defense stat, she will just be able to take as many hits as she needs to.
her reclass doesn't really do too much for that, unfortunately. I mean, Spear Fighter has a 10% growth in defense, which I believe is slightly better than Sky Knight.
Yeah, Sky Knight has a 0% defense growth, so that 35% that you see in Hinoka is all her personal growth.
The most unfortunate thing about her reclass, though, is the fact that it is Spear Fighter, so she's lance locking herself effectively, which doesn't really change much pre-promotion, but it is annoying post-promotion where, you know, if I'm promoting Hinoka from Sky Knight, I'm gonna go to Kenshi to at least get Yumi's for a little bit. But if you're going into Spearmaster, you're kind of just stuck with the one. The upside to Hinoka being lance locked, though, is that she is an actual good user of the Javelin. So she doesn't really get like bogged down by the speed penalty by it, and she will effectively just kind of become, I think, just faster Obero, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, her defense isn't quite as good, but her overall stat spread is generally better, although she does lose out on the attack of Obero's personal skill, which really does hurt her. Lances in early game Birthright are generally going to be more desirable than any other physical weapon type just because they provide access to the really good effective weapons in the Sword Catcher and the Beast Killer. These can continue to be useful later into the game, but once you get to the point where a lot of enemies have the choice to attack you from either 1 or 2 range, the lances become a lot more passive. I know in casual play, the Guard Naginata can be an extremely attractive option to a lot of inexperienced players, but what that ends up doing is the unit that you have holding the Guard Naginata isn't dying, but they also aren't going to be making very much forward progress because the 4 might is not going to do much to actually kill enemies, and you just can't even retaliate against enemies that are attacking you from 2 range. It's really not great.
Yeah, the best way to use the Guard Naginata, if you actually want to like Juggernaut with it, is by like forging it. And that is a pretty big commitment because I forget how much exactly Guard Naginata costs, but I know it is pretty decently expensive, and I know that you only get a limited amount of it. So it's like you have to really like know, all right, am I going to really use this Guard Naginata forged, or are other units going to want their own one?
So, if you choose to go the Guard Naginata route, which I don't really recommend, Hinoka probably will be able to sustain herself against a fairly large group of enemies, but her ability to make forward progress is going to be extremely limited, and once reinforcements come and start spawning and surrounding her, she's going to be in a bit of trouble getting out of there.
Yeah, having her, like, despite even, like, with the boosted defense and, like, her pretty good bases and stuff, like, she will eventually end up either needing to get saved by other units or just, like, healing with, like, a concoction or something, because what Birthright likes to do with its difficulty is kind of just enemy spam. It'll send a lot of enemies at you at once in one, like, tiny clump of the map, and it will just try to, like, slowly chip down your units with, like, paper cuts to kill them. And, you know, eventually that damage does rack up, and, you know, Hinoka won't be able to stay sustainable by herself forever.
If you do want to make one range work, I would recommend using the Venge Naginata. The Venge Naginata has 9 might, and that might doubles during enemy phase for a total of 18 might. So if you want to actually make forward progress while staying one range locked, I think the Venge Naginata is a much better option than the Guard Naginata. It doesn't provide the +4 extra defense and resistance that the Guard Naginata does, but the extra amount of kills that you'll be getting will probably make it easier for a healer support to come in safely.
Yeah. However, all of that kind of said, unfortunately, one range locked being like in Birthright is still just a pretty unfortunate place to be.
Yeah.
So, you know, much like every other unit in this game, you really want to try to find options to get her 1-2 range. And luckily she does have more than one option for that. Immediately starting out, she does get Javelin, and, her magic growth does kind of let her use the Bolt Naginata to a degree. She's not a great user of it, but, for magic base, and she does have a growth that does exist, so she can use it.
You will need to do a bit of work to get her to actually start killing things in one round with, like, magic tonics, maybe some of the spirit dusts and rally magic, but it is definitely possible if you put enough into that.
Yeah, like, even if she doesn't kill, she's a pretty great unit for just, like, general chip damage, because she has pretty good strength, so she can use the Javelin to just, like, do a little bit of chip damage and then have another unit come and kill, especially with the help of her personal skill. And then, if she's using the Bolt Naginata, the Bolt Naginata has high enough might to where, like, her low magic is still going to suffice enough to do, like, some amounts of damage. Even to enemies with, like, somewhat respectable resistance stats, she will still probably do at least a non-zero amount, so she can soften up enemies at the worst.
And having Falcon Knight bases does help with that, because Falcon Knight is a magical class. Falcon Knight does have 4 base magic, so she won't be quite struggling as hard if she goes into the Lance Lock 20 range options, but it's still not ideal because Falcon Knight is still going to be weak to bows, which comprise a surprising amount of late game Birthright, so you do need to be careful of where you're going to send Hinoka.
My recommendation, if you want to use her magic growth, is put her in base Sara, because I think it's just better than Falcon Knight. Let me just look.
Yeah, Basara is much better than Falcon Knights defensively. It has significantly higher defense, and while you do lose out on a bit of speed, Hinoka herself is fast enough already that she's not going to have any trouble doubling.
Compared to Falcon Knight, Basara has more HP, more strength, more magic, more skill, less speed, less defense, and less resistance. But yeah, the general overall stat lines that, Hinoka loses from going into Basara compared to Falcon Knight is not too harmful to her, especially since her personal growths and the stats that she loses are just, like, whatever. Like, they're good enough to where they'll just get fixed anyways. Especially speed. She can go into a slow class and she'll still be fine, because, like, even on player phase, she does get Darting Blow at base, and that'll help her at least continuously double things on player phase, because Norian enemies are still decently slow enough to where Darting Blow is usually just enough, not to mention all the options you get to fix speed and Birthright.
In the Spearfighter class line, she does also get access to quite a few skills. Seal Defense is probably not going to be very useful if you go down the magic route, but regardless of what weapon you use, she can be used as a very good source of chip damage and to set up for kills for your other units. And Swap probably is not going to be the most useful on Hinoka, unfortunately, because if you're going from Sky Knight to Spearfighter, you're losing the greater movement that would increase the flexibility of a Swap user.
I think the 2 seal skills from Spearfighter are pretty decent on Hinoka. If you put her back into a flying class like Kenshi Knight after grabbing those 2 skills, then you can have a bulky-ish Kenshi Knight that can just fly around, apply a personal aura, and, seal a bunch of enemies for other units to kill. Which there is always going to be some value in that. It's not going to be, like, the most amazing thing, especially since Seal Defense is going to make her personal skill, like, pretty redundant in most cases. But, when it helps, it will help. And, importantly, when she gets to level 15, she will get Lance Fair. So if you decide to continuously work on her Lance rank for the entirety of the game, she will get rewarded by getting +5 damage every time she uses a Lance.
Yeah, if you want to meet any of the late game benchmarks with Hinoka using the Bolt Naginata, Lance Fair is going to be pretty necessary. On the Basara side, she does get access to Rend Heaven, which is just a damage booster that she probably doesn't need, and it doesn't even help on the magical end because the Bolt Naginata cannot proc skills, and you probably don't want to be using a Tome on Hinoka to proc Rend Heaven.
And Quixotic doesn't really help her either. I mean, obviously, like, it gives her hit rates, and it gives her more chances to proc, like, Rend Heaven if you really want her to, but, like, aside from that, she doesn't care too much about proccing skills. Like, her damage output is usually good enough to where she'll just be killing enemies anyways. And if she's using, like, Bolt Naginata Hinoka or whatever, then she can't even proc skills anyways. Her skill and luck are good enough to where her hit rates will probably never really go too much further below, like, mid-80s at worst.
Yeah.
So it doesn't help as much as you'd think.
I'd say these skills are still a little bit better than the Sky Knight skills, at least. Darting Blow definitely does help her if you reclass her into a slower class. She can double without investment on player phase, although you probably won't need very much help to double on any phase to begin with, so not a huge boost, but you'll never complain about having it. Camaraderie is still not great on any unit because it's like 2, maybe 3 HP of healing per turn if you're set up for it, which she usually will be because her aura skill, Rallying Cry, does require units to be within 2 spaces, which does meet the activation condition. So it's not a bad thing to have, especially when she will be taking very little damage if she's using something like the Guard Naginata, but generally not the most impactful skill in the game.
Rally speed is always good. However, the next one after that is Warding Blow, and I don't even know if I really need to say why this is bad on Hinoka. Just look at her resistance growth. It's like, does she need this at all?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
She will probably be not taking very much damage from mages, no matter what class she's in. And if she stays in Falcon Knights for 15 levels, yeah, resistance is not going to be any problem for Hinoka.
Yeah. I think if staying in the Sky Knight line, it's much better for her to go into Kenshi Knight, not only for brief access for Yumi's, but also air superiority. I just like more on her. It's less applicable than you might think in Birthright, but when it is applicable, it is good to have. It's plus 30 to hit and avoid against all flying units, which you're never going to complain about.
Yeah. There are a few Wyvern Lords in late game Birthrights that you do need to be a bit concerned about because their 1-round thresholds are a bit difficult to meet, and having the extra safety net of I will never miss and they have less of a chance of hitting does help in letting you make more aggressive pushes that you otherwise wouldn't want to. Amaterasu is also a decent skill to have on Hinoka because she does want to be in range of your primary combat units for applying Rallying Cry, so having an extra healing aura on top of that is just icing on the cake, but it is a bit late to be getting something like that at level 15 Kenshi Knight. You will probably want to be promoting early if that's something that you want to be actively using.
Yeah, the Birthright level curve doesn't really allow for units to just naturally reach like 2020 like you're able to in Conquest and Revelation. So you pretty much either have to go out of your way to do a bunch of paralogs, or you have to early promote in order to get like a lot of these level 15 skills, which does hurt their viability kind of a lot, but they are still good skills if you do get them. You're never going to be like complaining about its presence, and you know, like if you are in a situation where Hinoka is able to grab this, it's definitely not a bad option to go ahead and do so.
Hinoka can get away with promoting a bit early just because her stats at base are just impressive and her growths are nothing to scoff at either, so she will be able to keep up. Probably not as well as your other units that promote at level 20, but she can definitely contribute and get kills when they're needed, especially when using effective weapons like the Sword Catcher and the Beast Killer to snag kills that your other units might struggle a bit with. So support Hinoka is definitely a viable option. You can get 3 rallies on her through just friendship in her base class, and stack 1 more on top of that through marriage, and getting Amaterasu at the very end is pretty nice.
Speaking of support, though, she gets a very funny class from her friendship options being Troubadour from Azura. Alright, so the main support that you can do with Troubadour are, you know, obviously she can get Demoiselle, Rally Resistance, and Inspiration. And the only ones that really matter of those 3 are gonna be, you know, Demoiselle and Inspiration. Inspiration will stack with Rallying Cry, so it's plus 4 damage to all units within 2 spaces, and then minus 2 damage to all units within 2 spaces, and then that also stacks with Demoiselle, so minus 4 to all male units within 2 spaces. So she's kind of one of, you know, she's kind of an incredible aura bot.
Yeah, the problem though is getting there, because Inspiration is the level 15 skill of Strategist, which is locked to tomes and staves, and if you look at Hinoka's magic stats, it's still never going to be great, even if she goes into a class that hard commits to magic. So you probably do want to be dipping into Strategist pretty late and spending the minimum time possible to get to Inspiration, but once you get there, the utility that Hinoka can provide in just 1 deployment slot can be kind of crazy.
Yeah, especially since she will get Rally Resistance along the way, and while not as useful as like pretty much any other rally in the game, it is still nice to have for when it is applicable, especially if immediately after putting, you know, Hinoka through Strategist Hell, she goes back into like Falcon or Kenshi and she just like hard focuses on like flyer support. She will pretty much always have an appreciated presence.
Yeah.
However, the cooler class that she can get from Troubadour is of course Maid, where she can use physical 1-2 range.
Maid is pretty slept on, but it is one of the best classes in the game just because it's the only class outside of the Ninja and Apothecary lines that gets access to daggers. So Hinoka having access to this through friendship is pretty big for her because it means she doesn't have to marry for access to 1-2 range physical.
She frees up Saizo and Kaze and I guess Mailcorn with a ninja talent for like giving ninja to other units, because, you know, she can just get into Maid and she'll do worse than she would in like Master Ninja and like Mechanist. I think you know, Maid is still like a lot of people call Maid like Diet Ninja, which is kind of true, but it still does work. Like, Diet Ninja is still good.
Yeah. And when you have Hinoka's stats, you don't really need the extra speed provided by Master Ninja, and her stats really won't be too far off from a lot of your other units that are in Mechanist. It is pretty impressive.
And getting Live to Serve is actually, it is a selfish skill, and you may not think that it's not too useful. However, it is nice for like self-sustainability, because in Birthright you get Festals instead of Staves, and Festals are 1-2 range healing, which, while like Hinoka's healing isn't amazing, it's fine enough, especially in a class with an actual magic growth and a magic base, where like she will heal enough to other units to where like Live to Serve will actually help herself a decent amount.
So if you have Hinoka and another 1-2 range Juggernaut, you can have her slightly in the back line, providing access to Rallying Cry for +2 damage, providing access to Demoiselle, which is -2 damage to male units, and using a Festal to heal, while also healing herself if she gets damaged. And that can be a very good setup to raise any 1-2 range unit of your choice.
Unfortunately, the last skill is Tomebreaker in Maid, which is useless.
Yeah.
She's taking 0 anyways from tomes. There's pretty much no reason to ever have this equipped.
I guess there are some children that might like a Tonebreaker inheritance, but by that point it's way too late in the game for it to even matter.
Yeah, like, really the only kids that are getting Tonebreaker are probably Jacob and Felicia's children.
Yeah.
And even then, not even a total guarantee that those kids would want it.
But Troubadour isn't the only support class that she has access to through friendship, because she can friendship with her sister Sakura to get Shrine Maiden. Unfortunately, this is not a fast support, so you will be waiting the full 5 maps to get it. But once you get there, you will have access to Miracle and Rally Luck, and if you go into Omiyoji, you can also get Rally Magic on top of that at level 5.
Yeah, Shrine Maiden is one of my favorite classes in the entire game. It's not the best class, obviously, but it is, on top of just being a very fun class in general, it's also just like a really solid option to go in for pretty much any unit. It has incredible bases in Priestess. It gives skills that are pretty much always going to be useful. Hinoka's luck growth is actually good enough to where you might be able to proc Miracle sometimes. And on top of that, she gets Rally Luck and then Renewal, and then, you know, if going into Omiyoji, she does get the other Rally, and her utility just goes through the roof at that point. And then if you decide to, like, wait a little bit to go into Priestess or something, you can train up her ranks a little bit with Bow in Kenshi Knight before going in there, so she has an easier time transitioning it from flying class into Priestess if you want. Because I think the hardest part about reclassing is, of course, E-rank hell.
Bows, of course, still are never going to be very desirable in Birthright, just because it's difficult to find places where you can enemy phase with them, and being a unit that can only really provide 1 kill on player phase each turn is something that pretty much any unit can do, and Hinoka also giving up the 8 movement of Kenshi Knights to go into Priestess does hurt quite a bit, but if you're using Hinoka as a support unit, then that matters a lot less, because at that point, you can kind of get away with providing an aura, providing rallies, and getting 1 kill on top of that is not something that you're going to complain about.
The nice thing about being able to go into these like more support classes too is that like we said earlier, eventually, like when she does get these skills, and in Shrine Maiden, all the support and like good skills that you would really want kind of end at level 5. You don't really care about counter magic or tome fair unless you're memeing, I guess. The nice thing is you don't have to stay in these classes for too long if you don't want to. You're gonna be in these classes for like maybe 1 or 2 chapters before you get all of the skills that you really want. And then, you know, if you don't want to be in Priestess and you want to like go back into Falcon Knight or go into your marriage class or whatever, she can just do that decently early on. And she won't have to worry about like, oh, I want to grab the skill, but I have to be stuck with a Brass Yumi for 5 chapters to do so. She doesn't really have to worry about that.
One of the nice things about Birthright is its level curve is so bad that by the time you naturally get to level 5 promoted, you will probably have infinite seals in the shop. So, reclassing at that point is not an issue at all. But moving on, we do get to her final friendship class, which is Archer, through her fast friendship with Setsuna. And Setsuna is actually not a bad partner for her, while the other two will have quite a bit of trouble raising their support ranks with Hinoka. Setsuna has a much easier time, because Setsuna is an archer. She provides an extra +2 strength and +2 speed. The speed matters a lot less on Hinoka, but having extra strength to start one-rounding things as she moves 7 move ahead of your other units will definitely help clear things out a lot quicker.
I think Setsuna is probably the best friendship option if you just want a low investment Hinoka. Low investment being like you're not really wanting to like reclass her too much and you're just trying to use her as like a filler combat role, because Hinoka can do a trick that a lot of units can do, but what's nice about Hinoka is that she starts in Sky Knight and can promote into Kenshi, and by friendshipping Setsuna, she gets Archer, which also promotes into Kenshi. So once she promotes into Kenshi Knight, she'll be able to get these skills from unpromoted Archer on top of the you know, Kenshi Knight skills. So she'll be getting skill +2 and quick draw. And that'll help specifically her player phase abilities, but you know, like again, it's nice to have for like a very like low investment standard, like, you know, filler combat role without trying to do anything too crazy with like seals or anything.
The main downside of deploying Setsuna to be Hinoka's backpack is that you're not making progress towards getting Setsuna married unless you're like doing some pretty well planned transfers to make sure that she gets all the support points she needs. So you will be deploying Setsuna for longer, and that is not always desirable given Setsuna's stats. But if that's something that you're willing to do to get quick draw on Hinoka, then yeah, it can be pretty impactful. Because you will be getting quick draw pretty early on at level 3 promoted, so you could definitely do a lot worse.
And of course she does have the option to eventually like later down the line go into sniper, but she doesn't need it.
Yeah.
She already has the damage output like well enough from like quick draw for like, because she'll probably not be enemy phasing too much as like a Kenshi Knight. So she doesn't really care too much about Bowfair, and again, her skill and luck are pretty incredible, so she probably won't be seeing too many shaky hit rates even with Yumi's. The only reason why I would ever recommend going into Sniper as Hinoka would probably be to do the funny Lance Fair, Bowfair, Kenshi Knight.
Yeah.
With her Heartseal class.
And you just really don't need the extra mites to kill much of anything in late game Birthright, because Hinoka does have effective weapons if she chooses to stay in Kenshi Knights, because the Beast Killer exists, and she will have a bit of trouble with generals, but she can use the Bolt Maginata and kill them in 2 rounds. It's not going to be a huge issue dealing damage, but it is funny. Even beyond the friendship classes, she does have quite a few options to get classes through marriage. Now, do any of these look particularly appealing to you?
Yeah, so the 3 most standout ones are Ninja from Kaze and Saizo and Cavalier from Silas. I don't think I really need to explain myself on why Ninja would be good for Hinoka, because Ninja is good for everyone. As we've talked about with, you know, like a Maid, you know, physical 1-2 range, gets access to high strength, high bulk, good skills in the form of, like, you know, eventually down the line, Shuriken Fair or Replicate and even Poison Strike is alright. And, you know, it's just a solid class.
Ninja is not a class that you want to go into for the skills. You're getting access to a good weapon and good stats, and that's all most units really need. Hinoka, having good stats already to begin with, is very well complemented by the Mechanist class, and if she goes to Mechanist, she will pretty comfortably be able to last through the rest of the game with no issues.
Yeah, she's also fast enough to where Mechanist is just like pretty much strictly the better option. So like, because Mechanist, the main appeal of Mechanist is like strength and bulk over speed, but Hinoka has enough speed to where she doesn't really care too much about the speed cut that Mechanist gives, and she'll probably even be able to still use things like Steel Shurikens, and even with that speed cut she'll still probably be able to double things pretty easily, especially on player phase with Darting Blow. The more fun option being Cavalier. Cavalier is kind of like Mechanist, where it's like it focuses more on like bulk and strength. It keeps her very high movement, and it also gives her a lot better skills and it lets her keep her lance rank too. Elbow Room, of course, gives her a damage stacking skill. Damage stacking skills are good.
Yeah.
Especially Elbow Room. Elbow Room's probably the best damage stacking skill in the game, just because of how accessible it is. It is one level in Cavalier, and while a lot of units in Birthright don't really get access to that, you know, Silas still gives it to his wife, and I guess Kaze, and, you know, any unit that gets access to it will always appreciate it. Same with Shelter and Defender. While Shelter is just like a really nice utility skill, and it if you want to play into a more support Hinoka, you can make Hinoka a flying Shelter unit, or I guess you can flip that and make Silas a flying Shelter unit with the cost of like less seals, which is nice. And then Defender, it does help a bit because, like, you know, it boosts her bulk a little bit, and it boosts, like, you know, it boosts all her stats on pair up basically, which is never going to be a bad thing. It's not going to be as impactful as like other bulk boosting skills, but, you know, with what little you get in Birthright, it is still nice.
Aegis is pretty much useless because it is a skill percent proc chance to reduce damage taken by several weapon types, and by the time you're getting it, you're getting to level 15 promoted in Paladin, at which point you're probably doing pretty okay when it comes to combat to begin with. It does technically help against, I guess, some like bow users, but probably not the most impactful thing to have. If you really want to bulk stack, you would much rather just go into Great Knight, and at that point, Hinoka is going to be one of your most difficult units for enemies to kill, because Great Knight base stats are kind of crazy. She's one of the best users of the Great Knight class just because her speed is so good to begin with. So she can kind of just stand there, provide her aura. Most enemies will ignore her because both her defense and resistance are very high, and she can just exist and get one kill when needed. And that's all you need for her deployment slots, which is going to be centered around Rallying Cry and her pretty good offenses.
And in Great Knight, she also gets access to the full weapon triangle, the full like main weapon triangle that is, and that as a result gives her access to the effective weaponry of this game. It gets her hammer access, you know, axe splitter access, armor slayer access, like you name it, she will have access to it. And, you know, we've talked so much hype about like how all these effective weaponries help with like all the bulky enemies. Now she really doesn't really have any like enemies that stand in her way too much. The only thing that you would really want to be like super careful of in Great Knight are like mages in the Camilla map, and which pretty much ends there.
She does take quite a big cut to her resistance stats, but Hinoka's personal resistance is so good that she probably won't die, and she can pretty easily kill them on the next player phase if she wants to. So even then, I don't think it's a huge problem.
Yeah. Her other class options are not too great.
Yeah.
Diviner is kind of redundant. Same with Azama marriage because of her Sakura friendship. But if you want to pursue like a different friendship with Hinoka, then Azama is still a nice option because, you know, it's a fast support.
I guess Magic Plus 2 can help a bit if you're going for the Bolt Naginata build with Basara Hinoka, but it's quite a bit of investment getting to marriage with Kaden or Hayato. I guess they can be good magic pair-ups if you're hard committing to Bolt Naginata Hinoka. You can do worse, but it's very specific in what it's trying to do.
Yeah. And she does also get Troubadour from Jacob marriage too, which is also another one of the redundant ones, but there is still like some form of like, you know, like merit to that. Like, let's say, oh, you wanted Hinoka to friendship with Sakura and get Troubadour. She obviously can't get an A+ support with both Azura and Sakura, So she'll have to take one of those A+ supports and then marry for the other class. And she can get access to the other class with either Izama or Jacob, which is nice.
The last class that she has access to is Samurai. And Samurai is pretty much always going to be a desirable class for one skill in particular, which is Vantage. If you have Vantage on a 1-2 range unit, if they for some reason fail to kill an enemy because their attack stat wasn't high enough or they missed, Vantage can help them clean up any kills that they missed on the following enemy phase, which allows units to have a much easier time sustaining themselves in the front lines without much support. And Hinoka, with Azura Friendship for Maid, really benefits from that. But if you're going for pretty much any other build, Vantage is going to be way less useful because she will probably succeed in getting any player phase kill that she wants to get, and you're probably not leaving her in big hordes of enemies that will die in 1 or 3 hits.
Yeah, and also a nice thing about getting Samurai is she'll get access to Master of Arms, and Master of Arms' stat line is actually really good. It again focuses a lot on like strength and defense and I think skill mainly, and those are 3 stats that you really like, especially if you're trying to like really play into them. And it keeps her Lance rank, so she won't be stuck in E rank hell if she wants to reclass into Master of Arms.
Yeah, it is definitely a nice class, but when you're competing with Great Knight, I am almost always going to be choosing Great Knight no matter what unit I'm looking at.
Yeah, for sure. Really, the question between Samurai or Master of Arms Hinoka versus Great Knight Hinoka is Silas wanting to marry someone else?
Yeah. But yeah, if you want to be using Hinoka as one of your primary combat units, like most units, her best way to do that is through Ninja Marriage, and if she marries Shiso, and she is one of Shiso's best options to get married to, she does have pretty impressive stats. So compared to a same level promoted at level 20, get to level 5 promoted, Shiso, she will have very impressive stats. Her attack is going to be 2 lower, her speed is going to be 2 higher, her hit is going to be 12 lower, her avoid is 2 lower, 8 less crits, 5 less dodge, but the same defense and significantly higher resistance, 8 more. So Hinoka is just effectively another Shiso, and Shiso having some of the most impressive stats in the game, that is definitely not a bad thing to see.
Yeah, she's really is just kind of like Shiso too, and like if the goal is to just kind of survive the enemy phase and like less so you're worried about like always like killing on the single enemy phase, even if Hinoka fails to kill some enemies, her higher bulk will probably allow her to comfortably 2-round enemies with like pretty much exclusively enemy phase, given how good her bulk is. Shiso can definitely do that too, but Shiso does have to worry about mages a lot more, and Hinoka just doesn't have that problem at all.
Yeah. The one thing Shiso does have over her when it comes to bulk is his natural access to Vantage, which Hinoka marrying a ninja does lock her out of. So Shiso will be able to get those kills that he missed out on from 1-rounding on the next enemy phase, while Hinoka has to take those extra hits, which is not always ideal.
The nice thing about Hinoka is, of course, being able to go into Mechanist rather than Master Ninja too, because Shiso pretty much needs Master Ninja if he wants to be like a juggernaut, because its speed is just so much better, and that's really the stat that Shiso wants to like fix the most out of his entire stat line. And Hinoka doesn't really care too much about that. And, as we've said with every other, like, fast unit in the game, she can pretty comfortably use the higher might of steel weapons, which is always going to be appreciated. However, Hinoka might not even need that, because her damage output is probably already good enough with just, like, a forged iron to 1-round enemies anyways.
The main issue that Hinoka will be seeing is that since she doesn't have high enough dagger rank unless you use like an arm scroll or have her see lots and lots of combat. She probably won't be at C rank shurikens by the time you reach the Berserkers in Hanzo's map, which can pose a bit of a problem with their massive attack stats with weapon triangle advantage on daggers. So she is definitely not invincible, but neither are most units that don't have natural access to 1-2 range. So you can definitely do a lot worse than Hinoka. She is just going to be very impressive. But another great thing about Hinoka is that she doesn't need to marry in order to get access to 1-2 range shurikens, because with her Azura friendship, she will also have very impressive stats as a maid. She does take quite a big hit to attack, being 3 less than in Mechanist, but she has even higher speed and pretty comparable stats across the board. She does lose out on 1 point of defense and 1 point of HP, but those are made up for by her ability to get access to even more skills through marriage, because she won't be locking herself to marrying Shiso.
Yeah. The nice thing about going with Maid rather than Ninja with Hinoka is that she is able to get a lot of these other skills. Like, you know, again, she can marry Silas and get, you know, elbow room to fix up the cut she takes to attack. She can marry, you know, like Hinata or Tsubaki in order to get Vantage, which is just, you know, an incredible skill for everyone. And then she could also, like, maybe get Astra if you want to use that. And, you know, like, the possibilities are pretty much endless. Like, she can even, like, marry Korin with this and get access to things like, say, Wyvern Lord skills or something insane like that.
Yeah.
And she'll be really, really good. You know, even if, like, you know, Mechanist versus Maid, I take Mechanist every day. But, you know, if it's at the expense of builds that could end up making Hinoka even better, I would say in some cases, I would take Maid.
Yeah.
Depending on how high effort my playthrough is.
And of course, this build for Hinoka is always going to be significantly higher effort than building a Shiso, but just having another unit that is just as good as one of the units with the best stats in the game and best classes in the game, probably not the worst use of your resources. The big trouble is just getting the friendship to rank A with Azura, which will take quite a bit of effort, because Azura's actions are going to be extremely contested because there are a lot of units that want her to dance for them, and Hinoka is usually not very high on that list. But once you get to the A+ support, then yeah, you'll be having a very good time. And you can delay getting the A+ support for quite a long time because Hinoka really does not want to go into Troubadour straight up. She would much rather wait until after she promotes to get into Maid directly.
And while it is annoying to build, you know, Hinoka and Azura's A support, they join early enough to where it's really easy to get a head start on it and just like not have to worry about it later on, which is always nice. Like, you have things like chapter like 12 or whatever with like all those like choke points where you can just, like, you know, if you're willing to sit there and take the time, you can have, you know, like Hinoka like dual strike with Azura, or just have Azura sit there and sing to Hinoka a billion times if you really don't care about turn count. But yeah, it's like it will take a while for units to really start like promoting. Units usually start promoting around chapters like 17, 18, if you're waiting to level 20, that is. So, you know, having that much of a time buffer to get that A support is always nice.
And no matter what you do, Hinoka will very often be deployed in any Birthright playthrough that you're going to be doing, just because her personal skill is that good. Extra +2 damage to all allies within 2 spaces without having to spend money on tonics is extremely impactful if you're willing to use it correctly. And having her stats on top of that is just icing on the cake, and it makes her one of the units that gets deployed the most in Birthright. Is there anything you want to add? Anything you want to plug at the end of this video?
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel of my own. I do a lot of Fates content. I don't really stray too much away from Fates, but if you are a Fates fan, definitely can check me out there. I do videos on all 3 of the routes. I do mainly like challenge related stuff. And yeah, I've been currently working on a playthrough of Birthright mainly, where I don't use paired up combat pretty much at all. I'm still allowing myself to pair up with other units for like movement tech, because I think that's cooler. But in terms of being able to use the paired up stats against the enemies, I'm not allowed to do that. And I'm making myself get every unit in the game married on top of that, which does include Hinoka. And my Hinoka in that run is probably the best unit in the entire army. She is +6 on strength.
What?
So she cooks pretty well. Yeah, if you want to see you know, just how good this Hinoka is, definitely go check her out on my videos.
Yeah. I was not expecting Hinoka to be one of our shortest recordings. Damn.
I was hoping for it.
Yeah. All right.